if I just do it from right here?
Wherever you're most comfortable.
Thank you. May it please the court. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, today's case is about trouble. Trouble brought about by Mr. Pete Mitchell and trouble fought off by Mr. William James. Mr. James didn't arrive at the 7-Eleven on October 2nd, 2014 looking for trouble, but trouble came looking for him, and that trouble arrived in a black Audi being driven under the influence and without a license by the defendant, Mr. Pete Mitchell. Mr. James, the victim in today's case, is all too familiar with trouble. In fact, he fights trouble on a daily basis in his career with the military. He's accustomed to fighting for America. He wasn't prepared or looking for the personal fight Mr. Mitchell started with him during those early morning hours. A fight that led to Mr. James having 3 lacerations on his head and calling for over 21 stitches because the defendant beat him repeatedly with a flashlight. Members of the jury, the trouble caused by Mr. Mitchell comes with repercussions. My name is Ashley Kemp, and along with my co-counsel, Mr. Stephen Vicari, we represent the state of Lone Star. We are here to serve the defendant with those repercussions stemming from the trouble he unnecessarily brought about. Today, the defendant stands before you on the charges of disorderly conduct and assault for attacking William James with a deadly weapon. And then I'm just going to put down. Don't allow the defendant to get away with the trouble he has caused, the trouble Mr. James wasn't looking for that evening. We ask that you come to the only conclusion that the evidence supports by finding Mr. Mitchell guilty of first-degree assault and disorderly conduct. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Who's looking? All right. Ms. Barnum?
Your Honor, may it please the court. Members of the jury, today you will have a lot of information presented to you. There will be witnesses, evidence, the prosecution's theory, and our case. And this is because y'all have a unique job as lawyers of fact and credibility within our criminal justice system. And this is an important job, because today, you will decide the future of a young man, Pete Mitchell. But before you decide his fate, I want you to look closely at the facts as they are presented to you. And when you do, you will see that Pete Mitchell was a target from the beginning. He was targeted by William James and J.T. Sanborn because of the way he looked. And then, he was targeted by the police based on false assumptions. Everyone ignored the fact that Pete Mitchell was threatened, trapped, and terrified. And because of that, he did the only thing he could do. He defended himself. Good afternoon, members of the jury. My name is Morgan Markham, and I, along with my co-counsel Monica Bracey, represent the defendant, Pete Mitchell. Pete Mitchell is a young man, just 23, who was born and raised right here in Lone Star. He went to school up the street where he studied film, and he currently travels filming action shots of skiing and snowboarding. Not only does he film these sports, he participates in them. He's passionate about them. But on the night of October 2nd, 2014, Pete's passions were almost cut short when he was attacked by William James in the parking lot. He was attacked by the man who he thought was breaking his legs that night. Now, on that night, Pete Mitchell had gone out to the bars with some of his friends. He took a taxi home, and then he decided he wanted some late night food. So he got in his car, and he drove to the local 7-Eleven. Now, Pete will tell you he made a poor decision, that he shouldn't have been driving. But that poor decision does not mean that Pete deserves what happened later that night. An incident wholly disconnected from his decision to drive. An incident, which the evidence will show, caused him to be threatened by 2 men, trapped by those same 2 men, and terrified for his life because of their actions against him. Now, at some point while in the 7-Eleven, Pete said a bottle of iced tea was not good for him. And people tell you how a big military man with a shaved head, Mr. James, got in his face and ordered him to clean it up. But Pete didn't. And instead of Mr. James cleaning up the mess himself or moving on from the situation, he got in Pete's face and called him a worthless hippie punk and told him to F off. All over a bottle of iced tea. So what did Pete do? He left. Pete walked away from that situation and he went out to his car. But the evidence will show that Mr. James, a man who is used to having his orders followed, didn't give up. So Pete went out to his car and he began to back back out when all of a sudden a red truck came zooming up behind him with Mr. Sanborn and Mr. James within it. Pete froze. He thought that they were going to hit him. He thought maybe they would go around him. But instead, the evidence and testimony will show that Mr. Sanborn and Mr. James got out of their car and came running over to Pete's driver's side window. Pete didn't know what to do. He was terrified. Now, we expect Mr. James to take this stand today and tell you that he was going over there to simply ask Pete to move his car. But I want you to ask yourselves, if Mr. James wanted to ask Pete to move his car, why did both men get out of the car? Why did two men go to Pete's window? Does it really take two men to ask a young man to move his car? So, Pete was terrified. He got on the phone and he called a buddy to be there to hear if anything, God forbid, were to go wrong. And members of the jury, something did go wrong. Mr. James opened Pete's door. He began to scream at Pete, telling Pete how ungrateful he was for the service that he and his buddy had provided, for the freedoms that he protected. Pete will tell you that it's only increased his feelings of being threatened and trapped and terrified for his life. Further, the evidence will show that it was at this moment that everything changed. Mr. James, a man who is used to having his orders followed, was fed up with being ignored. So he hit that car door, slamming it against Pete's legs, crushing his legs, trapping him by his car door. Now, after the police arrived, people tell you that he was still terrified. So when police began to ask him questions, he felt like he was being targeted for doing something wrong, when all he had done was defended himself. So Pete made a poor decision. The cop asked him if the flashlight was his. He said no. He was asked if the flashlight was his, and he said no. He was asked if he was driving that night, and he said no. Pete was in a terrifying situation where he was trapped by William James in his car door, and he responded the only way that he could. He reached in his car, he grabbed that flashlight, and he swung it over the car door, hitting Mr. James in the head. Just once. Just to defend himself. Now, Pete made the poor decision to lie to the cops. And he himself will own up to this later. He will tell you how being threatened, trapped, and terrified clouded his judgment. But today, he's here to tell you the truth. Today we are here because the state has charged Pete with first-degree assault and disorderly conduct. Today, it is the state who bears the burden of proof, which means they must prove to you each and every element of all their claims beyond a reasonable doubt. The highest burden in our judicial system. Further, we have raised an affirmative defense, meaning the state not only must prove that each and every one of their claims beyond a reasonable doubt, they must also prove that Pete Mitchell didn't act in self-defense. But today we expect the evidence to show you that Pete responded to this situation the only way he could. He defended himself. Now, keep in mind, we have no burden of proof. And that is because there is a presumption of innocence in our criminal justice system. It means we don't have to prove to you or explain to you exactly what happened that night. That is the job of the state. And to try and prove their case today, the state will call two witnesses. They will call Officer McNulty, the responding officer to the scene. During his testimony, I want you to ask yourselves, what did the police officer ignore on October 2nd, 2014? Next, they will call William James, the alleged victim. During his testimony, I want you to ask yourselves, what about a story doesn't add up? Now, after the state presents their case, we will have our own opportunity. But keep in mind, we have no burden. We will only call witnesses to show you how Pete was a target from the beginning. He was targeted by William James, and he was targeted by the police. First, we'll call Kelly Bradshaw to the stand. By taking that stand, she will explain to you how Pete was trapped at his car by two men. How the situation looked terrifying. Next, we will call Pete Mitchell. By taking that stand, he'll be waiving his right to remain silent. And he'll take that stand to tell you how he he is trapped by two men at his car door with his legs being crushed, when he's terrified for his life, he responded the only way that he could. He defended himself. And that is why I'm asking you now, and my co-counsel asks you again at the end of today's trial, to return the only verdict the evidence will support. Find Pete Mitchell not guilty. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Barnum. Please call your